Hello everybody, it's Sarah and it is the 1st of June, which means two things. First of all, it's of course time for my May wrap up, but second, it is Pride Month. I am so excited every year for Pride Month. I have once again a few videos planned, however this year I'm not quite sure if I'll get to all of them. Like as always, I have my adult queer fantasy recommendations video, and then I also want to do the third and last part to my sexuality and gender in fantasy video. That second one I'm not quite sure if I'll get to it though in June, because my June is stacked. But anyway, that's a worry for another day. Happy Pride everyone, and now let's get into my wrap up for May. And for May, once again, let's get started with the stats. As always, I am using Storygraph for my stats, although I remembered, or like I noticed that last month I actually had a DNF, or like in April I had a DNF that I didn't mention in my stats because Storygraph doesn't tell me, like it doesn't include the DNFs in the stats. So I had a DNF in April, I also had a DNF in May, and those DNFs are not part of the stats. So, how many books did I read? I read a total of 7 books, one of which was a reread. Then the moods that I read were mysterious, adventurous, tense, dark, emotional, and challenging. So once again, quite a dark month, but that's not surprising with fantasy. In terms of pace, Storygraph tells me that about 70% of the books that I read were medium paced, and then 30% of the books that I read are judged by the majority of Storygraph users as slow-paced. Also, once again, not a surprise, I love slower books. I read quite a few books with more than 500 pages in May. 57% of the books that I read had over 500 pages, and then 43% of the books had under 500 pages. In terms of fiction or non-fiction, all the books that I finished in May were fiction. Then the genres, I had fantasy, then LGBTQIA, romance, horror, and historical. I'm trying to think of which book would be romance though. Kind of weird, like even as a subgenre, I'm not quite sure there. Then in terms of format, 6 of the books that I read were physical, one of them was an e-arc. My star ratings were rather high actually, aside from my DNF. In May I had 2 3 stars, 2 3.5 stars, 2 4 stars, and 1 4.25 star. However, I did not have any 5-star books. So that was it in terms of my Storygraph stats. Now in terms of my inclusivity stats, I did quite well when it comes to queer books as well as BIPOC books. Once again, I didn't really do that well when it comes to mental health and also disability rep in my books. But in terms of BIPOC books, 4 of the books that I read this month were written by BIPOC authors. 4 of the books that I read this month included queer main characters or queer world building. And then I don't think any of the books actually that I read this month had mental health or disability rep, sadly. And so that was it already for the stats, and the sun just vanished. I am sorry if the lighting is going to change a lot throughout this video. I am filming during the day and it's sunny out, except sometimes it's not apparently. But yeah, that was it for the stats. So now let's get into my thoughts on the books that I read, and let me start with my DNF for May. Although I'm actually gonna start with my DNF in April because I forgot to talk about that in my wrap up completely. My DNF in April was Tolerant by CJ Sparrow. I was given an e-arc of this, like I was contacted by the publisher and asked if I wanted to read it, and I said yes because it sounded quite interesting. I can't really say that much about the book because, to be honest, it's mostly a pretty standard fantasy type story. However, I usually, unless it's something completely outside of my comfort zone, I usually say yes to arcs. So I started reading this. I DNF'd it at about 50% because I have to be honest, it was just really boring, predictable, and dull. It was also a YA book, so not necessarily something that I read that much anymore. I mean, I think maybe it might be a story for someone who's just getting into YA fantasy and just getting into fantasy, but in terms of me being someone who has read fantasy for 15 years at this point, like almost 2/3 of my life not really that interested. So I DNF'd it. And the other DNF I had, the one I had in May, was Eyes of a Hawk, Yggdrasil's Gaze by Sean Crow. I requested it on NetGalley because it sounded interesting. I can't summarize it that much, to be honest, because once again, I don't really get a feel for a story from a summary of a story, and I kind of feel uncomfortable summarizing a book just by its summary. And to be honest, I did not get far enough into this book to tell you what it was about. I did not even get 20% into it. The reason for that being that it was so completely overwritten and stuffy. It was terrible. It was horrible. There were so many just adjectives, and I think adjectives can be a good thing in writing and can give you really a sense of the world and what is happening. However, in this book it just felt forced, because every single noun had like at least 1 or 2 adjectives stacked with it, and it was so stuffy and completely, as I said, overwritten. It felt like the author was trying really hard to sound like deep and beautiful and whatever. And then the other thing that really bothered me was the dialogue, because the dialogue used a lot of cursive to, you know, show which words were stressed. However, every second word was in cursive, and it was just, it made it really hard to read. And I was like, you know what? Life's too short to read books that I just purely don't like. And so yeah, I don't remember if I rated Tolerant on Goodreads, because I did get 50% into it. Usually I only rate DNFs if I get 50% or more into it. I did not rate Eyes of a Hawk, but I would have, from what I've read of that book, I would have given it 1 star easily. It was so bad. But yeah, now that that's out of the way, let's get into the books that I actually finished. Not quite actually yet, because I do have some currently reading, because I this month somehow did start reading some non-fiction finally. I finally started properly working through Orientalism. As you can see, there's quite a few more tabs in here, and I'm about 70 pages into this. And then the other book that I continued on, I read the first chapter back in January, and I read the last 3 chapters over the past few days. But I continued with The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, A New History of the World, and I'm now 4 chapters into it, or about 130 pages. And so yeah, I'm enjoying both of them right now. I'm doing this as audiobook, I'm physically reading the other one, and yeah, I'm excited to finally pick up some non-fiction this year. Since for the first time in a long time I once again have a reread, let me start with that one, and that is Priestess of the White by Trudy Canavan, which is the first book in the Age of 5 trilogy. So, fun thing about this trilogy, I read this trilogy after I read the Black Magicians trilogy by Trudy Canavan when I was about, well, I read the Black Magicians when I was 12, I think I read this with 13 or 14. And I think I read the entire trilogy like twice or something. I think I did reread it at least once at the time. And I, for some reason, just really didn't like it. Like, that's what I remember of it. I remember a few scenes from the series, and I remember just thinking I didn't like it. I didn't like it enough that my German copies I actually gave to Hannah, who was my best friend and roommate. And so now that I've finally finished reading the last of Trudy Canavan's books, which now are up there, so I finally finished the Millennium's Rule series, and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna give this series a second chance, because like that, since 2021 I've reread and read almost all of Trudy Canavan's books. And you know what, I really enjoyed myself. Like, I gave it now 4 stars again. It's just so fun. But first, let's talk about what this is about. This is set in this world where there's 5 gods, and those 5 gods cannot directly influence the world around them. They need their 5 chosen representatives, and they kind of move stuff through them and, you know, influence politics and stuff through them. And so our main character Oriah is at the beginning of this story chosen as the 5th of those representatives. She's chosen as the 5th white. They're called the Whites. However, in the south of this continent, a new cult is starting to rise who also worship 5 gods, and they are kind of thirsting for war, and they also have some sorcerers that are really fucking powerful. And so yeah, it's kind of about those 2 powers clashing, and then also some people who are caught in between. Some immortal sorcerers and humans who have hidden for centuries and so on. And so why did I enjoy this so much again? I mean, first of all, Trudy Canavan's writing is just really easy to read and to digest. Whenever I read her books, I just fly through them because they're just so familiar and comfortable to me. Same kind of with the main characters. They usually follow the same archetypes, the same tropes. I have to be honest, in terms of her main characters, Oriah is probably one of my least favorites. Mostly because she kind of has some really shitty stuff that she wants to do. Like basically there's this oppressed group of people who have this very special healing magic, and she kind of wants to appropriate that healing magic for the priests of her own religion, of the gods that do exist, because they're not as good at healing magic, so that that other oppressed group and religion at some point won't be necessary anymore, and they'll basically just die out, which is really shitty. Like, let's call it what it is. It's really shitty. But aside from that, it's just fun. Also, just so predictable, because Trudy Canavan has a thing where her younger female main characters often get together with older or immortal male characters, usually characters that are in some type of mentor position to the younger female characters. So that's the case here as well. If that's something that you don't like or that really bothers you, then do not read these books. But for me, it's a trope for Trudy Canavan, and I find it kind of amusing, not gonna lie, in terms of, you know, these stories. Then let's get to the books that I finished for the first time this month, and starting with my 3-star reads. First, I have Smolder by Laurell K. Hamilton, which is the 29th book in the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series. This series started out as a kind of paranormal mystery type story. You follow Anita Blake, who is a vampire executioner. She is in fact the executioner with the most legal vampire kills, and because of that she's quite feared by vampires actually. And she's also called onto cases by the police for her supernatural expertise. As the story progresses, it turns more into supernatural romance. There's always already some kind of romantic subplots in the first few books, but you know, in the later books it really takes over. However, this one, once again, I finished it in a day. Anita Blake is one of those series that I just read really quickly, really easily. It's not always unproblematic. There can be some kind of, I don't want to say like overtly biphobic stuff, but there's quite a few times some like internalized queerphobia and stuff, and there's also some descriptions of BIPOC characters where I'm like, that's kind of, I don't know how to feel about that. But overall, the series is my guilty pleasure series, I have to be honest. And it's just so funny because, like, since a few books ago, which obviously is since a few years ago, I think Laurell K. Hamilton just really discovered therapy, or has started going to therapy, because all the characters are now in therapy and are always talking about how many wonders it did for them. It's so funny and hilarious. And in November, the 30th book is gonna come out, and yeah, I'm excited. I have to be honest. I'm just really excited. But also that's why it's a 3 stars. Like, I'm having fun with the books, Some of the books less so, some of the books more so, but they're not good by any stretch of the word. Next, I want to talk about my second 3-star together with one of the 3.5-star reads, because I finished the Drowning Empire series by Andrea Stewart. So I read The Bone Shard Emperor as well as The Bone Shard War. I gave The Bone Shard Emperor 3.5 stars. I gave The Bone Shard War 3 stars. But before I get into what my issues specifically with the second book were, let me tell you a little bit about what these are about. Basically, in the first book, you follow multiple different POVs. One POV is a smuggler, one POV is the daughter of a governor of this little island in this huge empire, kind of just trying to do what's right. And then another POV is the emperor's daughter of the empire. And within the family of the emperor, there's this very specific type of magic called bone shard magic, in which you can use the bone shards of humans to kind of power constructs. However, the emperor, for reasons we don't know, refuses to teach Lynn, our main character, this magic. And so the first book kind of follows Lynn as she is trying very hard to get behind some mysteries around the palace, but also trying to claim her legacy as the daughter of the empire. Or the daughter of the emperor is what I wanted to say. So I did enjoy the second book more than I enjoyed the first book. I think I gave the first book also 3 stars, or I might have read it in 2021 and because of that not rated the first book. I do have a full review of the first book, so if you want to know my thoughts on that, I will leave it down below. However, what I remember of the first book is that I just felt like there wasn't that much direction to it. However, that definitely changes in the second book, which was why I already enjoyed the second book a lot more. It's been 2 years since I read the first book, so even though I didn't remember particularly much about what had happened, I had no issues whatsoever jumping into this book without even just looking up a summary or anything. I thought it was really well done in that regard, and so yeah, I had a really good time with the second book. The third book, actually, for most of the book, I had an even better time than with the second book. I thought for sure that this was going to be a 4-star read. However, then the ending happened. I mean, there were already some things beforehand where this story definitely has issues with things happening more so because they're convenient rather than because they are happening organically. So there's some things, I don't want to give examples because I don't want to spoil anything. There's some things where I'm like, oh, this is 100% happening for plot reasons right now, and because we need to move to a certain place, and not because, you know, there's any other reason for this to happen right now, or because it feels natural for the characters or whatever. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of the main villain in this story. It just, yeah, just personally wasn't a fan. And then the ending just really got even more obvious with these things are currently happening just so something specific other can happen. Like, specific characters were acting 100% a certain way, so other characters can then do something else, and because of that I basically saw the entire ending coming. I also didn't really feel the emotional impact of the ending. I thought, for me personally, without any spoilers, it was a little bit safe. It was not harrowing enough, which is kind of funny and kind of amusing, because there's another book that I read this year where the ending, again, I won't say any spoilers because if I talk about, like, if I say that book, then it might spoil things for this one. But the ending went along very similar lines to this book. However, that other ending really got me. This one didn't whatsoever. And then the last thing that I wish would have gone a bit further into is that in the second book already, but also in the third, there's always talk between, you know, the empire, is the empire necessary, or is having an emperor good for the people? And I just wish that the ending would have gone a bit further into that, or like, I don't know, we would have defeated the big bad earlier in the story, and then we could have gone more into the discussions of, you know, democracy and stuff a bit more into the book as well. Yeah, it's just, I enjoyed most of the book, but the ending just kind of ruined it for me, not gonna lie. So the third one sadly only got a 3-star, but overall I still think the series is a good and fun read, and there's definitely people out there who are absolutely gonna love this. I'm sadly just not one of them. I'm sadly just one of the people who enjoyed it but didn't love it. Then my second 3.5 star I had in May was The First Binding by R.R. Virdi, which is the first book in the Tales of Tremaine. This is a chunker, and I'm gonna have to film a full review on this because I have so many thoughts on it that I cannot sum it up in this wrap up, and so I will keep myself very short. What is this about? This is about Ari, who is a storyteller on a mission, and at the beginning of the story he performs in this tavern and he meets this singer and they kind of hit it off. And so this singer convinces him to tell his life story. If this sounds familiar as a setup, that's not a surprise, because the author does admit that he was very strongly influenced and inspired by the Kingkiller Chronicles to write this story. So why do I have a lot of conflicting thoughts? I mean, first of all, the framing story I just wasn't interested in. I did like the actual, you know, the past, Ari's life story, I did really enjoy. Aside from that, there were just some things with narrative structures where it was very obvious that the author put in thoughts, but for me personally it just didn't put in quite enough thought. And so there were some things that were just like, you know, infuriating, because it's like, I can see what you want to do, but you don't manage to do it. And it's frustrating because it's very obvious that the author put more thought into the writing than a lot of other fantasy authors nowadays. It's one of my big criticisms of fantasy that a lot of authors don't seem to think about, you know, narration, writing, and how all of that influences the story, which this author obviously did, but it just feels like it wasn't quite there. And so yeah, but you'll get my full thoughts in a review, which I'll probably upload sometime in June. I will film it after this video, but it'll be a while until you get it. Next, I have my 4-star read, and that is The Children of Gods and Fighting Men by Shauna Lawless. I will also upload a review of this one because this was the buddy read of my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, and that is all about reading one adult fantasy written by a woman or genderqueer person per month. And so for May, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men was the buddy read. This is in fact not high fantasy, it is historical fantasy set in 10th century Ireland, and it's really interesting because it very much strongly follows, you know, history in Ireland around the 10th century, just around the time when you had the last Viking kings in Ireland, and also you had the tensions between, you know, the old Viking beliefs, the old Irish beliefs, and then also the Christian beliefs starting to come in, and Christian priests coming in, and there already being a lot of monasteries and stuff. And so in this time period you follow 2 women. One of them, there is a pronunciation guide somewhere here. One of them, Gormla, is the wife of a king, and she wants her son to succeed his father on the throne, which is not going to be easy because he's not the oldest son. However, she knows that if her son is to be safe and if her son is to survive, then he needs to be on the throne sooner or later. Also, she's part of a magical race called the Fomorians, who are one of the magical races from Irish mythology. And then the other woman we follow is Fola. Once again, trying my best from the pronunciation guide, who is one of the Tuatha Dé Danann, which is another one of the magical races from Irish mythology. And this race has now for a very long time kept separate from humans. However, they are still spying on them, and so she is sent to spy on one of the human kings. So I will also once again have a full review of this, so I will keep myself short. I overall really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the two main characters. I thought that they were very different, very spicy in their own way, both of them. However, the thing that I didn't so much enjoy about this is that it has one of my biggest pet peeves, and that is two first-person POVs. Can authors please just stop doing that? Like, 99.9% of the time, you are not good enough. I'm sorry. And I probably would have given this closer to 5 stars if it wasn't for that thing. That was the only thing that I really just primarily didn't enjoy about the book, and it just bumped my rating. Because, yeah, I just don't like two first-person POVs. It sucks. It's never good. I have never read a book where it worked. And then the last book for this wrap-up, the book that I enjoyed the most this month, is actually the buddy read for my book club for June. So if after what I'm going to tell you, you want to pick it up, all the links to my book club are down below. Join us. I will also have a review for this one up, but I'm waiting for my Illumi crate to get here so I can hold up a pretty copy of it, because the book I'm talking about is in fact Witch King by Martha Wells. Because I'm going to have a review, I will once again try to keep my thoughts short, but in this story we follow Kai, who is called the Witch King, or he was called the Witch King once upon a time. And in the very first chapter of the story, he wakes up imprisoned. And he also finds out that his best friend wakes up with him imprisoned. And so from then on starts a journey of first trying to break out, but then trying to first of all find out what happened to their other friends, specifically his best friend's wife, and also trying to find out who betrayed them and who imprisoned them. And so the story of them trying to solve this mystery is interspersed with stories from his past and how he came to get the name the Witch King. So that being said, this story is most about a very depressed emo demon who is also kind of gay, and his angry lesbian sidekick. And if you go into the story with that expectation, I think you'll really enjoy it. There is a lot of world building in this story. However, the world building doesn't come to play so much in the story itself. It's mostly there to provide a backdrop for the story and to provide ambience, so to say. There's some politics, however, we don't go that deep into politics. There are some things left unresolved, however, as far as I know, so far it's a standalone. And yeah, I think you need to go into this book with the right expectations to enjoy it, because I've seen a lot of mixed reviews, but a lot of the stuff that I've seen in terms of negative reviews often has to do with, well, I expected this big epic story, but really it's just a very small quest to solve this mystery. And so yeah, I personally really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. And once I realized one specific thing about Kai, that was really, I was like, this is perfect. I absolutely adore and love this. And so yeah, that was it for the last book that I finished in May. If you have any thoughts on any of the books that I talked about in this video, leave them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club are linked down below as well, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!